Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we are lucky enough to get to speak with Emily Counts. Emily Counts was born in Seattle, Washington, where she currently lives and works. Drawing on craft traditions, she creates ceramic and mixed media sculptures that explore connectivity, identity, memory, and merging a sense of the past and the futuristic. Her work has been exhibited nationally in institutions, including the Museum of Arts and Design in New York, the Torrance Art Museum in California, at Oregon Contemporary in Oregon, and in Washington at the Bellevue Arts Museum. She received her BFA from the California College of Arts and has received grants from Artists Trust, the Oregon Arts Commission, the Regional Arts and Culture Council, and the Ford Family Foundation. She was an artist in residence at RAID Projects in Los Angeles, Plain Space in New York, and a 2020 resident at the Varda Artists Residency Program in Sausalito, California. Counts is currently represented in Washington by Studio E Gallery and in Oregon by Nationale. Emily Counts, welcome.
Hello, thank you, Kendra. I'm happy to be here. And thank you for curating Homemaker. I was really pleased to be invited and so happy to be showing with these other wonderful artists. I think it's a great show. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So I'm starting with an image from Homemaker. And if anyone's not familiar with my work, I make ceramic and mixed media sculptures. I primarily work with ceramics, but I also include sometimes wood, plexiglass, stained glass, sometimes metals. Lately, I've been working with fabrics and hand dyeing velveteen. So I think of myself as a sculptor, but I'm also kind of a ceramicist at heart. And so I thought today that I'd focus on the 5 pieces that are included in Homemaker and kind of talk about the different series that they're each connected to. Because I'm always sort of stretching and searching for different formats for my sculptures. So I end up going in a lot of different directions. And the different pieces that are in this show kind of tie into various themes or kind of groupings of types of sculptures in my practice. And something that I wanted to mention is that my work is really personal and it's derived from memories, and it comes from me kind of like combing through memories of childhood, looking at objects that were really fascinating to me when I was young and that are fascinating to me still. I'm thinking about my own connections to people that have been important to me, people that have passed away. I'm thinking about my body, how it relates to nature, a lot of themes involving nature and aging and decomposition and growth. But everything is really, stems from my own experience, but also I think that it's very important, the stories that the viewer brings to my work. And I hope that when I'm making work that the objects that I'm making are things that people can really connect to and that they can bring their own meaning. But, during this talk, I'm going to be talking about my own meaning, my own experiences. So I also wanted to discuss a little bit my my process for developing ideas for sculpture. So I was going to show some images from my sketchbook and talk a little bit about that. I have a background in painting and drawing, and I got a degree in painting. And so the act of making artwork that's two-dimensional is really important to me, but it's just not part of my finished product usually. But the act of drawing is really crucial to the way that I develop ideas. And when I'm working in my sketchbook, I'm just sort of bringing these images out of the mysterious ether, or, you know, my imagination, but sometimes like what I'm putting down on paper is really surprising. And I think that the act of drawing and especially drawing in a sketchbook where it's just personal and it's not meant to be, you know, shown at all, it's really for myself. There's a lot of freedom there, and I think that I'm kind of tapping into that essential act of being an artist and of being creative and of like embracing the mystery for me that is you know, being an artist. And when I'm making a sculpture, I look back at these sketches and I try to capture some essence of that immediacy of drawing. And I try to kind of like honor, you know, even if the sketch has a really wonky, kind of quick quality to it, I try to be true to the original sketch, whatever I choose to kind of go with for a sculpture. So like here, these are drawings for upcoming sculptures. You know, it can be something very simple, but I'll commit to it. And so here I was thinking about relationships, connections, death, rotting. There's a bunch of insects and moth that I see here. This kind of like drooping fruit and flower theme. Another one like that I did last month. And I really, like, I keep coming back to this goofy flower that's like so heavy, it's upside down. I don't know. Yeah, the sketchbook is just, it's really crucial. And so I wanted to share some of those images. And then here is a piece that's in the show, Make Love is the title. And when Kendra invited me to be in this show, this was one of the first pieces that came to mind because it was a piece that I made at the very beginning of the pandemic. And I think it really does relate to my shifting concept of home at that time. And how, I mean, something else that happened for me at the beginning of the pandemic was that I got engaged to be married. And so I was thinking a lot about commitment and love and intimacy and connection, and how my concept of home was shifting, like being committed in a different way to this person. And so I started making this series of vessels that were linked with their handles. But I was also thinking a lot about the loss of touch between like me and my friends, me and my family members, because we're, you know, sheltering in place and we were suddenly disconnected from everybody, and really missing, yeah, just like being able to give someone a hug and like, yeah, it was, so it was this very kind of confusing, bittersweet moment where I was looking forward to something, and then also everything was really scary and stuck inside more. But but these pieces also relate to home in that I'm using pattern. So it connects to my interest in wallpaper and textile design and all these types of repeated patterns that have always been kind of interesting to me, and that when I think of these things, I think of my grandmothers and the fabrics that they had in their homes and wallpapers and that type of thing. So here's another linked vessel from that series. And I'm sorry if these images are they cut off for you guys?
No, they look good to me.
Okay, that's just the way I'm seeing it. So when I was doing these linked vessels, I started making cups that were connected by their handles, and I was experimenting with a lot of different surface treatments. So looking at these, you can kind of like see the different ways that I work with ceramics. And this is where I'm kind of using glazes more in a painting drawing manner, using underglazes and having kind of like graphic imagery and motifs depicted. But then I also, with this series, I was making vessels that are more like relief, using mushrooms and flowers and sculptural elements, kind of more of a three-dimensional treatment. And the previous one and this one are photographed from a show that I had at Nationale, which is the gallery that represents me in Oregon. And then I started experimenting with like poured glazes, which makes this process a lot easier because it's actually really difficult to glaze the two handles with like specifically different colors of glaze. And it's one of the reasons why I actually just don't like making these anymore, because it's like too much of a pain in the butt. But when I was making these kind of messy linked vessels, that was like a little less stressful. And just transporting them and not having a handle fall off when I bump it the wrong way, they're just tricky, technically. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on to, this is another piece in the show called Falling Love's Arrangement. And yeah, this one features kind of some wilting flower stems, some flowers that are in their late stages, leaves that are bending. I was happy with this one because of I kind of had a more limited palette using these like more muted tones and browns, the mauve and gold. But this series of flower arrangements, the way I make them is that each flower is an individual component and it's separate. So it's not one connected piece. And every time that I make, or every time that I arrange this piece, the different elements can go in different places within the vessel. And so this is the first piece that I made in this series of flower arrangements that are ceramic. And this one I made also at the beginning of 2020. And I made this one after my grandmother passed away, and her name was Rosie. So she had a flower name. And this piece, I just had this sort of urge to make something that was commemorating her life and also the loss that I was feeling and the importance, how important she was in my life. And I started thinking a lot about flower arrangements and the giving and receiving of flowers and, all the symbolism behind that act of giving flowers and how like we're sharing these things during really important times in our lives, like when there's celebrating or when someone passes away or graduation or marriage, and I think that it's like flowers are something that are universally beautiful and symbolic for people. Here's a couple detail images of this one. Close up. This one was kind of just like, in the beginning, I was shoving all the stems in a pot and all the ceramics kind of like rubs up against each other and makes a lot of noise. But later, as I was continuing with these series, I started sort of separating the stems so that there's less chance of like breakage and chipping and stuff. But here's another one from that series of the flower arrangements. This one has a morel mushroom and some leaves of sheep sorrel. So there's some edible plants in there as well, which is symbolic for a dear friend who passed away. And then I wanted to mention that the flower arranging is also autobiographical because I used to be a florist, like during college and during my 20s and early 30s. So I was kind of doing that off and on for about 10 years. So it's also just like a muscle memory for me of like arranging flowers, and it made sense to, I don't know, make a ceramic arrangement. And also, I didn't feel like I was ever really that great at being a florist. I mean, I was good. It was, I did passable work, but I didn't think I was like really excellent at it. And so making these arrangements it's like a way for me to get it right and have control, I guess. And so the flower arrangements kind of developed into me doing these single flowers that are wall-based. They're sort of shallow, maybe like 3 inches max depth from the wall, and just these large, oversized, wilting flowers. And I guess I don't really make, or I'm not really drawn to flowers that are in their prime. I'm interested in the wilting, the drooping, dropping petals, folding stems, droopy leaves. And it's just kind of like what I'm thinking about right now at this stage in my life when I'm in my mid 40s and thinking about my body changing. And I think I genuinely at some point was surprised that everything was going forward and not backwards. I don't know if not logically, but some part of me thought maybe I'll get to be in my 20s again or something, but it just keeps going forward. So I'm thinking, I'm thinking about, I mean, it's just like, it's something we have to accept and find the beauty in that process. And so when I'm just thinking about that a lot, and the process of aging and the magic that we can see there. And then this is another piece in Homemaker, the other flower arrangement. And this piece is, it's bigger than the other one. So all these flowers are quite a bit larger. And it's kind of in a state of being a work in progress, just because it will take on a slightly different form and character, as it's meant for my upcoming exhibition at the Museum of Museums, which is in Seattle, and that's opening in June. And this arrangement is going to be a part of that show. And when it's in that immersive installation, there's going to be different fabric elements that are added to it. There's a couple leaves that are made out of velveteen and lamé that are in this piece, but there'll be a little bit more when it's in that other show. And actually there was meant to be this one kind of elaborate velveteen flower in this piece, and I told Kendra this the night before I was coming to install at Archer Gallery. My dog shredded the velveteen flower, so I have to remake it. But anyway, the cool thing about these arrangements is, like I said, they can always change. They can always take on a slightly different character depending on how, like where I place the flowers within the vessel. So there's some details of that piece. And then this is a picture I took during install. I was the first person to install work in the gallery. So it's not really a show image, but it's just my install picture. And then I was going to talk about these two pieces, which they're illuminated. They have electric wires running up to the ceiling, and they have kind of a low watt warm LED bulb in there with little holes cut in the sides of the ceramics so that you can kind of see the glowing interior. So this is called Levitation Apple on the right and Levitation Peach on the left. And they're about the same size, although the other one looks smaller, this one. But Levitation Peach. Yeah, so these pieces are part of kind of a newer series that I've been working on, of fruits that are that are decaying or that have bites taken out of them, or have little critters, little bugs and insects crawling, and flowers growing out of holes. It's sort of this connection to the flower pieces that I was making that are drooping and wilting. It's just another extension of those themes of, yeah, decay, decomposition, transformation, beauty. Here's some images of the Levitation Apple. And yeah, I mean, I'm always searching for my own ideal aesthetic when I'm making work. And so I do meditate a lot on beauty, or on what will be satisfying to me, because I'm really aesthetically fickle, and my desires or my taste in color or form kind of shifts a lot. I'm constantly chasing that. And this was another piece from this series. This is called Midlife Strawberry. And this was also at Nationale recently, this past fall. This is Vapors Plum from that same series. So it has little insects, spiders, worms, there's a moth, and these kind of decayed golden patches. I'm using a lot of gold luster on my ceramics. And I can't remember if I was talking about this earlier, but surface is really important to me. So I love the combination of like highly metallic surfaces with matte and satin. I love glossy, and all the variety that you can get with ceramics. And I think here in this detail of the spider that's on the side of this piece, you can kind of see that practice of painting and drawing, because I'm using underglazes here with a really tiny brush and just making these little marks. So yeah, even with the sculptures that I'm making, the marks are very important. Here's another one, a bitten apple, and it has kind of like an oozy, I don't know, maybe it's sweating and dripping and dripping this gold luster. There's a couple moth babies that live on the apple. And then I also wanted to speak briefly about illuminated sculptures, because Levitation Apple and Levitation Peach also tie into that series. So these are two pieces, these towers, these stacked sculptures I made in 2017. And this was during a period where I was working mostly with abstract shapes, abstract forms. But all the little areas that kind of look brighter, those are windows cut into the hollow ceramic shapes, and then they're backed by little pieces of stained glass. These pieces, I'd say each they're like a little under 5 feet. And I've been, for the past maybe 13 years, working with illumination inside of ceramic sculptures and having colored materials, either stained glass or plexiglass, that are combined with the sculptures. That kind of, it's a way for me to include colors that I can't necessarily obtain with ceramic glazes, and also to have that experience of seeing something that's glowing right next to something that's opaque. I think that's an interesting combination. Here's another more recent illuminated piece. I've been working a lot more with representational imagery and with the body, using figurative themes and shapes. This one is called Ghost Power Suit, and she does have some illumination in her face. There's little stained glass shapes that are like in where her kind of eyes are, and then between her legs, this kind of pink violet light is being emitted. And this is something I've been interested in recently, of having light that is escaping from a piece and that's, extending the reach of the piece as the light travels along, a nearby surface, either a wall or this is on a pedestal. When the lights are lower when the ambient light is lower in the room, it becomes really dramatic. And it's kind of this extension without it being a physical extension. Here's another one that I made around that time. It's just a head. This one's maybe 14 inches tall, with stained glass behind these openings in the eyes. And this piece has nature relief motifs that are kind of encroaching on the face, taking over the face. And then one more piece that uses light. There isn't any stained glass in this figure. There are just openings in the, like right here in the face, in the sweater, down at the bottom of the sweater, and in the eye and mouth. There's just little holes, and there's a red LED bulb inside the piece, and this orangey red light is glowing. And again, it's a color that I couldn't obtain by any other means. It's a little, in this image, it's a little hard to tell the exact color, but it's just this really beautiful, vibrant reddish orange. And then I was going to show at the end here some images of my studio and just do a little virtual studio tour. So this is the outside of my studio. I rent a space from an artist who, it used to be her studio space until she built like an outbuilding in her backyard. So I have this good window box. It is a basement space. There's low ceilings, but that's okay. I'm not super tall. And I just get really lovely light when it's sunny, especially in the afternoon. This is the table where I do my glazing. I took these pictures when it was, I hadn't been in the studio very long, and I cleaned up, but it's actually just kind of picture it like 3 or 4 times messier. This is a porcelain butterfly I was glazing last month. And also now I have more tables in this space, but I I had this wall lined with tables for working with ceramics. You can see my slab roller there in the background. I do pretty much everything with slabs. It's all, everything's hand built. So that I end up using that machine a lot. And there's some process images that were taken by the photographer and artist Marilyn Montefar. This was several years ago when I was doing my project for Facebook. And yeah, she took some cool pictures of me in the space and these tiles that I had in progress. Hand sculpting a hand. And a picture looking out through the window box. I always set things up here in this little space. And then tools. What I've been working on lately is larger, and I have kind of grown beyond the bounds of my studio, which isn't really that big. So I'm now also using a portion of my studio mate's studio. So here's some images from there. I'm working on life-size pieces for that upcoming show, as well as working on soft sculpture. So with the hand-dyed velveteen, making fruits, and I have a bunch of really big flowers that I'm making out of velveteen. Yeah, and I'll end there with these are works in progress, some life-size figures from the waist up. And that's it for my images. So I will stop. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Emily.
You're welcome.
That was wonderful. Does anybody have any questions for Emily? And if you would rather type them into the chat, I'm happy to read them too.
I have a question. You talked about this at some length from piece to piece, but I wonder if you could give me a little bit of your thoughts around color as a part of your ceramics process. You talked about using underglaze as kind of a drawing, painting, craft work, right, directly on it. And as I've always kind of jokingly said that ceramics has a brown problem. Sorry to any ceramics artists in the room, but like just so many glazes are basically brown. And I'm always super intrigued when I see a more active use of color on that substrate. And your use of color has always just, fascinated me. And now that you've gotten into glowing lights and stuff, like it seems like you're thinking about it even more. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that and what it's like to paint directly on with like underglaze, and a little bit of your practice and how that has kind of influenced you over the last, 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, you're correct. When you go, I only use commercially available glazes. I don't really make my own. What I do is I take glazes that I buy and I mix them together. So I kind of make my own formulations, but I'm not like mixing from powder form or like doing glaze chemistry. But when you go, shopping for glazes, there's a lot of browns, there's a lot of like earthy tones. And I like gravitate towards more kind of poppy, punchy colors. And I've just been kind of going through everything that's available and all the different manufacturers of glazes, pulling out those products that have the quality that I want in terms of intensity of color, and then working with them to kind of make my own shades. And I've been just doing so many tests and experiments with them that I think it's really important for me at least, to become intimate with the glazes, because you really have to know how it's going to turn out, because when you're working with them, it doesn't look like how the end product, it doesn't look like how it will become after it's fired. So everything has to be, it's kind of like making a painting in your mind's eye. And only with like trying over and over and over again to get the specific either colors or particular application am I able to kind of guess at what that outcome will be. But there's a line of underglazes, Amico velvet underglazes, that I found to be the most similar to like using gouache, I guess. And within, they have, I don't know how many colors they have, 50 maybe. There's kind of a lot. Not all of them are going to have the application that I'm looking for, which is basically like drawing with gouache or watercolor or ink on paper with a fine brush. So there's only like a handful of those colors within that product family that I've found where I can accomplish that kind of drawing technique that I'm talking about, where it only needs one coat. So I can have that kind of immediacy of drawing, if that makes sense. Whereas a lot of the other products, whether regular glazes or underglazes, you need to like keep going over it again and again. But I've just found a couple colors and products where I can kind of replicate the feeling of, when I'm working with bisque fired ceramics, it's almost like a brush and gouache on paper. Did I answer your question?
You totally did. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I mean, what I was asking for, right, was like process questions. And I think that it's always good for students to hear the amount of experimentation that can go into finding something as simple as like, I want an underglaze that I don't have to recoat 6 times for it to be opaque, and obviously, that's not going to be the first couple that you try. So yeah, thanks a lot. I think what I'm still really attracted to in a lot of the decisions that you're making are kind of contrasts of color or glow. Like you mentioned, like a glowing light and an opaque surface beside it. And those things continue to be like, in addition to just your forms, which are lovely, it's like, this is like that next layer of like surface that I really love. So thanks for your comments. I'll shut up now.
Thanks, Grant.
Oh yeah, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I really liked your description on how you're interested in flowers, more the decay of flowers, not and I love your color schemes. I was really attracted to them, and I like the way you incorporate mushrooms, like those morels sticking up there.
Thank you.
I have a friend who's on the call actually as well, and she keeps sending me these this woman who makes paints and dyes out of mushrooms. She I don't know what it's called. Maybe my friend Erin can get in there, but she, like, all her palette is these dyes that and the way she paints with mushrooms, like the breaking down of she dries them and then makes paints. And yours kind of remind me of that, your color scheme of very mushroomy. Very cool. I was wondering, I have 2 questions, like the fragility of your bouquets. I was just like, how in the world do you transport these things? And just kind of almost worried about them in the gallery space of someone knocking them. Or I love the size of your bouquets. Like, I don't think your pictures really show how big they are. They're very strong and big, and I love in Kendra's background these huge examples of your bouquet. And I was wondering if you could ever make them ginormous, like a huge bouquet. Would that be a possibility, or is it just too fragile?
I think anything's possible. right now, what I'm doing is I'm making, like I just made a flower that's 8 feet long, but it's a soft sculpture. So I'm kind of accomplishing that in the moment using other materials, but I do think it's possible for sure. You know, with the flowers being made in pieces. But yeah, I mean, you're correct. It is, what's tricky is putting the transportation is easy enough because they're just all separate pieces. I wrap them each carefully, each of the flowers, but when I'm putting them together in the vessels, there's a moment where it's a little like I probably should have someone spotting me, but I do it by myself because they're often balanced against each other. The stems, where they go down into the vessel, they're like making the structure on the inside, which is how you make a flower arrangement. You kind of use the base of their stems to position the top parts of the flowers. So yeah, it's a little, I'm not at the point yet where I would want someone else to set up these pieces, I guess is what I'm saying. Because it's a little tricky. But I'm also just controlling, so I'm sure someone else would do fine. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat. Would you like me to read that? So Sid says, hello, can you talk about the process of translating the style of your illustrations to your sculptures? Was it challenging or did it come naturally?
I think it comes naturally. Once I have that drawing, my body just, I don't actually know how to explain that. I just make it. If I have the drawing, I think it's just why I'm suited to work in 3 dimensions. I just kind of have an instinct of how to build things up. But also I've been working with ceramics since I was in middle school. So it's kind of just like a lifelong process of figuring it out. So now it's at the point where I almost think of it like building a gingerbread house. Like all the slabs of clay are like different pieces of dough or cookies that I'm kind of just piecing together. But I don't know if it's something that I do so unconsciously. It's hard to describe, but I did, you know, I'm not a teacher, I don't teach, but I had an intern this past summer and I figured out how to describe my methods, I guess, to her.
Oh, Carson.
I love, your work in the show is just gorgeous. But I was also really excited to see the glimpses we got of your upcoming show. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. So my show at the Museum of Museums is going to be in a space that's dedicated to immersive installations. And it's about 1,800 square feet, so it's a pretty big space. I've been working on these pieces for a year. And so it's been this big undertaking because it's going to be the biggest show that I've ever created. But it's figure-based. So I have these life-size sculptures that I'm making that are self-portraits, but they're also portraits of my mother, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother. So they're kind of like composite portraits, as well as elements, characteristics of my best friend who passed away. So it's these bodies that kind of bring us all together. And very like, there's a very loose narrative where I'm creating this journey on a boat and they're all traveling to meet this great grandmother wizard queen. who's going to be a larger than life-size figure. But yeah, that show is it's about memory, and it's about transformation. There's a lot of nature motifs, a lot of flowers and fruits that are going to be included as possession, like objects that these figures are taking on this journey with them. So it is like, again, all this personal symbolism, but I think this open-ended narrative that people can, connect with, I hope. But there'll be video included. I'm working with a lot of fabric. This much more of a mixed media situation, I guess, because I'm using a lot of plexiglass and wood and material. It's not as ceramic heavy, I guess, although there are a lot of ceramics. Yeah, there'll be sound. So it's yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll put the website to the Museum of Museums in the chat here.
Thank you.
One question from Erin. Erin says, I love your work. I'm curious to know if you are or have been inspired by any other artists in any medium.
Oh, I've always loved Yayoi Kusama. And I did used to work more with installation like earlier in my career, and I found her to be really influential when I was a little younger, and I still love her work. And I really love David Altmage. Do you know that? Does anyone know that sculptor? He's just his pieces deal with mythology and also like these ideas of like decay and death and like these beautiful magical moments in nature. And his pieces and installations are just so complex, and I love that idea of embracing complexity and detail and kind of like falling into those highly detailed worlds. I think there's times when I've been trying to understand minimalism, but at the heart, I'm more of a maximalist.
Thank you. Is it spelled Altmejd? Altmej? Is that David? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I always forget if it's J or D at the end. Yeah, JD. Yeah.
Super. Thank you.
I have a quick question. What tricks or suggestions do you have for students to get past self-doubt or a block of some sort?
Well, you just have to keep working for sure with a block. Yeah, self-doubt. I mean, it's been a huge problem for me. And I'm trying to think like, I think it's kind of the same as self-doubt in other areas of your life, not just in your art practice. Like, in the end, it's not helpful. So if you can like step aside and like, if you're having negative self-talk in regard to a certain piece, or just your work in general, just accept it and look at it and let it pass, and remember that it's going to be temporary. But yeah, I fluctuate a lot between, I try to just kind of like recognize it and move past.
That's awesome. That's some helpful advice. Thank you. It reminds me of that. I heard once someone say the difference between quitting and stopping. It's okay to kind of take breaks and stop every once in a while, but that's different than putting it all together. So,
Yeah, yeah, you just have to keep, put some, if something's just really feeling negative, put it aside and do something else. Or take a break. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? We're up against the clock here. Okay, well, thank you so much, Emily. I appreciate it. Thank you for everyone for being here.
Sure, thank you. Everyone, yeah, it means a lot to me that you came to the art talk. And again, thank you, Kendra, for organizing. And I hope everyone has a good day.